What is a nome in ancient Egypt? And no, I'm not talking about garden gnomes. Let's talk about it. A nome, spelled Nome, essentially was a district or territorial division. The ancient Egyptian word for it was spot, while the Greek word meant pasture, dwelling, or district. Each nome was ruled by a nomarch, or a heri tep-aa, which essentially translates to great chief. And sometimes this gets translated directly as governor. Now, I know this is kind of a crazy map with some of the nomes as well as towns of ancient Egypt, and the division of these nomes is essentially relatively stable until the Ptolemaic period, where some were added and then others were renamed. In total, there were 20 nomes in Lower Egypt, or the Delta, all the way up there at the top of the map, and 22 in Upper Egypt, or along the Nile going towards the south. Here we have the 20 nomes of Lower Egypt here in the Delta, and most of these nomes had a major city as a locus on essentially the entire area, though this really wasn't a requirement. I like how the nomes in Lower Egypt, especially those up there in the Delta, are almost organized based on the tributaries of the Nile. But for Upper Egypt, which you see here, is essentially divided in small little sections as you go down this fertile strip of the Nile. The nomarchs that would rule these areas usually had hereditary titles, passing down throughout families, though sometimes these would be appointed by the pharaoh themselves, but that was usually only when the pharaoh was quite powerful. And in those times when the pharaoh wasn't that powerful, these hereditary nomarchs of essentially any random individual nome could assert themselves, and sometimes that led those rulers to asserting control over the entire country as pharaoh, like in the First Intermediate period.